Envision a man lost within an enigma, an ordinary schoolteacher plunged into a realm where shadows hold secrets and reality bends with deception. Larry Winthrop, a man entwined in the fabric of time, finds himself adrift in a world that defies comprehension. Once grounded in the familiar, Larry now grapples with the unknown, seeking a way to navigate the treacherous path that has become his life. Larry Winthrop, a man on the brink of discovering the ultimate truth, his destiny hinging on the outcome of his final judgment.
How he ended up in the alley. He wasn't even sure in which direction he was walking. It was quiet, with only a slight howl of the wind. His head throbbed with pain. He rubbed the back of his hand against his forehead, and when he pulled his hand away, he could see the blood dripping from his fingertips. Blood, he thought. He had no idea why he was bleeding. Confused, he looked around for a door. There were large garbage cans lining the alley. The streetlights made every shadow more ominous. Thump! The sound came from behind him. It sounded like a door. He turned to look back into the darkness of the alley. Weird, he thought. The length of the alley seemed odd. In fact, he couldn't see where the alley ended and the streets began. It was as if the alley went on forever. He turned back towards the direction he was walking. Again, no end to the alley, just buildings, lights, garbage cans, and the sound of the wind. "Hello!" he screamed. "I'm hurt! I need help!" Larry lost his balance a few times. He was really hurt. He was scared. His heart pounded, and he could feel the sweat down the back of his neck. "Need to get out of here," he repeatedly said to himself. Thump! That sound. There it was again. A sense of panic started to overcome him. He turned to the right, and there was a large garbage can hiding in a doorway. He stooped behind the can and hid in the shadows. He counted silently to 5, then peeked around the corner. He wasn't alone. He could feel the presence of someone. He held his breath, hoping to keep as quiet as possible. That's when he heard them, the slow, methodical footsteps coming towards him. "Don't panic, Larry," he repeated to himself. He leaned his back against the door. He reached for the knob, turned it, and realized the door was unlocked. He looked up and read the sign on the door, Salem Antiques and Dolls. The footsteps were louder now. He could see the shadow of the long figure stalking him. Fight. Yes, I can fight and maybe figure out what's going on. No. What if he's the reason my head is bleeding? He argued with himself. The figure was closer now. The footsteps were heavier, almost pounding the pavement. Whoever the figure was following him was much bigger than he anticipated. His only option was to take the door. He opened the door and dashed inside, slamming the door behind him. It was a storage room. There was a large chest to his left. He ran and pushed the chest against the door. His eyes adjusted to the darkness. There were shelves of old lamps, figurines, photos, and small music boxes stacked neatly on shelves. Everything was dusty, as if no one had been in the room for years. He saw a large pile covered with white sheets. Maybe it was a couch, he thought. He was tired. He could rest. No, not a couch. Too many peaks. Too many odd shapes. He walked to the pile and pulled away the sheets. Startled by the sight, he jumped back. Under the sheet was a stack of people. They were staring right at him. Their skin was pale, their eyes dark and cavernous, and it looked as though they were reaching for him. Larry fell back and tripped over a box behind him. He squirmed into a corner, never taking his eyes off the mound of death before him. It took him a moment to collect himself. After he calmed down, he started laughing. "Larry, you fool. They're just mannequins." He stood up and walked over to them. Upon closer observation, he could see that they were plastic, void of life. The mannequins were dressed in old clothes, maybe from the 1700s, he guessed. He counted 14, 12 men, and 2 women. The women looked as if they were in their teens. The men looked distinguished. They must have been the elders in the community, he figured. There was anger in their eyes. He looked closely. It was rage. The faces of the girls were that of fear. "Who would make something like this? I gotta get out of here," he said aloud. He turned and walked towards the door to what he thought was the storefront. He opened the door, and instead of walking into a storefront, it looked as if he'd walked into an old church. There were 2 rows of benches. A banister ran across the front of the benches. Several large chairs sat in front of a platform. "This is a courtroom," Larry said. "What the hell?" He looked around. He saw no windows. He saw no other doors besides the one he came through. Panic overcame him again. Something was wrong. Something was seriously wrong. Thud! He turned to where the sound came from. The back door. The stranger had somehow removed the chest. He ran to close the door to the storage area. That's when he saw one of the teenage mannequins. But she wasn't a mannequin. She was a girl standing in the doorway with a look of hatred in her eyes. She pointed towards him. "You thought you could use your black magic to get away, didn't you?" she said. Her accent, Larry thought, was kind of British, but nothing like he'd ever heard before. "You didn't think we'd find you, did you?" Larry backed away from the door. I have no idea what you're talking about. Who are you?" "Time has eroded your mind, Mr. Winthrop, but I assure you it has not eroded mine." "Mr. Winthrop?" Larry replied. "My name is Larry. Larry Dolliver. I'm a school teacher here in—" Larry paused. He couldn't recall the name of the city. He couldn't remember the grade he taught, nor could he name the school. The girl walked through the door, and behind her stood the other mannequins. They walked through the door one at a time, never taking their eyes off him. But they didn't speak. "Having a hard time remembering, Mr. Winthrop?" No, I remember just fine." She pointed at him. "Lies. Always you lie." "I'm not lying. I don't know what you're talking about." "You will in just a moment," a deep voice explained. The shadow man walked through the door. His face was paled and wrinkled. His eyes were low and his mouth formed a growl. His hair was white, and he wore a white cloth over a black cape. He was a large man, over 6'5", Larry guessed. A judge, Larry thought. "Indeed, Mr. Winthrop. Tonight you will face your final judgment as you should have almost 300 years ago. There is no escaping now." "I have no idea what you are talking about. I'm just a school teacher. This is insane. 300 years. I'm 38 years old." "Mr. Winthrop," the judge yelled, "you are neither 38, nor are you even truly alive. You exist only in a special realm where your black magic allows, and it is only by the grace of God that we are here to usher you to your final damnation. Payment for the crimes you've committed. Tonight, you shall have your final judgment." "What are you talking about?" Larry yelled. "We are talking about the lies you told that led to the death of 2 innocent girls. Your lies, sir. You told to hide your own evil ways." "You killed me!" the girl cried out. "I don't know you!" Larry screamed back. The girl walked up to him. She stood just inches from his face. "My name is Ann Parker. I am the daughter of John and Mary Parker. I am 14. You accused me of being a witch. You used your black magic to convince the people I was a witch. They burned me at the stake." She pulled the other girl next to her. "Her name is Sarah. You also accused her. They cut out her tongue and then burned her at the stake as well. It was only after their death did we begin to suspect you." The judge interrupted. "It was only by happenstance that someone came upon you while you practiced your wickedness. Did we learn the error of our ways? But before we could administer justice, you disappeared into the future." The judge explained as he moved to sit in the large chair. "In your haste, you left evidence, and we used your magic to track you down." Larry took both hands and pulled his hair. "This is crazy!" "This is justice, Mr. Winthrop," the judge yelled. "Enough! Let the trial begin." Larry felt his body tense. Confused, he struggled to move but could not. For more than an hour, he heard Anne testify how he, more than 300 years ago, accused her of witchcraft. His name was George Winthrop. He came to Salem to win souls for the devil. He'd travel throughout Europe and the New World, casting spells and winning souls, each time adding years to his own life. He created spells that made it seem as if Anne had magical powers. He made it so that whenever Sarah touched an animal, it would die. On several occasions, he killed women and left parts of their remains in the home of Anne and Sarah. The fear he conjured caused chaos, and the 2 girls were quickly apprehended, tried, tortured, and then burned at the stake. Then he heard how his own hubris made him feel invincible. He flaunted his powers, thinking he could easily manipulate the masses to accuse someone else. Only they didn't. So he created a spell and walked into the future, and for 300 years, 12 men, the executed girls, and the judge followed him. Each understood that by doing, they sentenced themselves to death as well. But in sacrificing themselves, the devil agreed that if they could catch him, he would allow them to render judgment against him, taking his soul and releasing all of the other souls he stole. "You have heard all of the evidence against you, Mr. Winthrop. What say you?" asked the judge. Larry stood stunned. Only now were the years coming back to him. He recalled his time as a Union soldier. He remembered being on the plains fighting Indians with General Custer. There were years he spent with a circus during the Great Depression. He walked through the concentration camps in Germany at the end of one too, and he was a high school history teacher in Boston. And he remembered all of the lives he had stolen. He could see their faces. Tears swelled in his eyes as the faces of young and old entered his memory. Their names, their ages, what their last words were. He remembered it all, and he could feel their pain. "Guilty, I am guilty," he cried. He turned to Anne and Sarah. "I am sorry, I am so sorry." Anne looked at him as if she wanted to show some sympathy, but she did not. She put her arms around Sarah. "It's going to be okay," she whispered to Sarah. "Jury, cast your vote," the judge ordered. "Guilty," they said without hesitation. The judge looked at Larry. "Mr. Winthrop, having been found guilty of witchcraft and murder, I sentence you to death and eternal damnation in hell." In that instance, a guillotine appeared. Larry did not hesitate. He walked towards the guillotine and laid his head in the stock. He looked straight ahead. They were all standing in front of him. No one said a word. And then it was dark. Mr. Johnson opened the door of his antique store. His grandson ran behind him. He entered the store and went behind the counter. His grandson ran towards the old stockade in the corner. "Don't play with that, Billy!" Mr. Johnson yelled. Lying on the floor was a doll. Billy picked it up. The head was missing. He looked around and found the head under a table. He took it to his grandfather. "Look, Grandpa, I found a doll." Mr. Johnson looked at the doll oddly. "I've never seen this one before." He placed the head back on the doll. "It's an old doll, but it has new clothes on. That's odd." He turned around, and behind him on a shelf were 15 other dolls. "I guess it belongs here." "Are those the Salem witch trial dolls?" Billy asked. "Yes, they are, and—" Mr. Johnson stopped to think. As far as he could remember, all of the dolls were in storage under a blanket. He didn't remember placing them on the shelf. "Strange," he said. "What is, Grandpa?" "Oh, nothing. Hey, let's get those wagons ready to go. I'll let you test drive it." "Cool," Billy yelled. This is an original story and not generated by AI. The author is James Manning, the creator of Quick Start Creative. If you want to hear more original stories as well as AI-generated stories, like and subscribe to the Quick Start Creative YouTube channel.